I was going to college and playing soccer, and I struggled to maintain a sense of everything because I was getting ready for, to go to school. And I was in high school. I think I was a sophomore or a junior, and literally was watching the TV and watched the first tower, um, first tower on fire. And then I watched on live TV as the second one hit the second tower. And so realizing, and I lost a family member in the second tower. So, I felt deeply connected to New York. So when that happened, my whole family felt it. And so I felt it too. When the Iraq war kicked off and they said they were going after the people who had done it, I felt like, I'm wasting my time in college when I could go after these people who are doing this and causing more harm and more damage, to my family and other families. So at 6 months into college, I quit, and I actually enlisted beginning of 2004. So right as like the year after we went into Iraq, I enlisted.
And you enlisted with Iraq very much, Iraq or Afghanistan very much in your mind.
Oh yeah, I knew what I was going into. In fact, my recruiter didn't sugarcoat it to me. He said, "You're going to have 3 or 4 months of training and then you'll go straight to Iraq." And I was like, "Okay." And when I went to MEPS and I did my ASVAB and everything like that, and I went to MEPS, and they're like, well, you could do counterintelligence. He's like, you could do psyops. And I was like, no, no, I want to be a mechanic. And they're like, come again? They're like, what? I was like, oh no, I want to be a mechanic. I said, they're like, well, if you do psyops, I'm like, no, that makes me too close to everything. That makes me too close to the front lines, too in touch with everything. I said, I promised my grandmother, oh, I'll be in the motor pool, I'll be working on cars, working with auto parts. I'm like, I grew up doing that. I could totally do that. So like I chose to be a mechanic based on that. And my recruiter's like, you're crazy. He's like, if I were you, I'd do this. And I was like, I'm not in it for a career. I'm in it to do my time and serve and get out and go on with the rest of my life.
So it sounds like when you chose mechanic, I mean, part of your thinking was, I want to serve and I want to be part of this mission,
Mm-hmm.
against, the global war on terrorism. But it sounds like you're thinking mechanic, I'll be doing something useful that's a contribution, but it's not a combat role.
Yeah, it was more so of like I did not want to go kicking in front doors. I did not want to be in the line of fire. I just wanted to do what I could to help. And so I thought, well, I know how to do this already. I'm really good at it. My dad has taught me everything. I mean, when I was in high school, I was working on my own car. I thought, man, that's perfect. I'll do that because, at least it's something I love to do. So I'm in a bad place and bad things are happening, but I'm doing something I love. So I was like, this can't be all that bad.
You mentioned in your memoir that you do a number of different things in Iraq, but it seems that most of it focuses on what understandably would be the hardest job of all, and that involved recovery. So first of all, what was recovery? And well, I guess first, how did you go from mechanic to recovery? What was recovery anyway?
So when I went through advanced individual training, which is where you actually learn to work on the military vehicles, which I was really skilled in and actually really excelled. I was in the top 10% of my class, which makes sense because I already knew what I was doing. They gave me an opportunity to get what's called a skill identifier, which is more training, but more specific training on certain things. So one of my skill identifiers was recovery, which was being able, almost like a glorified tow truck, basically. But I was learning how to recover the military vehicles, learning how um, to take them from certain situations and being able to make them roadworthy again. So as a mechanic, you would be what would they call almost like a combat mechanic, where like you would go out with your tow truck, almost like like a road rangers, right, on the highway. They go out, and if they've got basically a tow truck, but they go out and they fix the vehicle, and if they can't fix it, they tow it back, right? Same concept in the military. We go out there, a car or a Humvee breaks down during a convoy. You go out there and you try and fix it on the spot. And if you can't fix it, then you tow it back. Well, I was like, oh, perfect. Like I can do that. Like that's not that serious because at the time I didn't know how bad Iraq was. And I'm like, oh, I'm thinking like, oh, they broke down like on the side of the road and it's, like a flat tire or whatever. That's super easy to fix. So I did that skill identifier. And when I got to my unit, I was put in with the recovery crew. So basically, we learned how to drive. So I drove a Hemet wrecker, which is, I want to say, the equivalent of like a regular tow truck, but just a little bit bigger. And then I learned how to drive the head. The head is a heavy equipment transport vehicle. It's basically an up armored semi truck. If you think of the normal like freighter trucks, and it's basically that, but the whole shell is completely up armored. And I think I sent you a picture of what our actual head, our vehicle. And then on the back, that's actually, that picture is the Striker that we recovered. The first vehicle I ever recovered was the Striker, and it's actually on the back in that picture. Me and my unit, my recovery unit, were bowled in, and we were supposed to be doing a debriefing um, on like the SOPs, like standard operating procedures for Iraq. We're doing recovery. And we sat there and we're going through it. And she's like, now we're going to talk about mortuary affairs. And I'm like, what's that? And like, I distinctly remember my sergeant turning to me and going, shut up and listen. And I'm like, okay. And I'm a PFC. So like, I'm just like, all right, sergeant, I'll just sit here and listen. And so she was telling us about how to bag and tag the bodies because we weren't just going to be recovering the vehicles. She's like, if you recover a vehicle that's actually broke down, chances are it's been blown up. And I was like, I didn't sign up for this. Did not sign up for this at all. I thought I was just going to be fixing things on the side of the road, just doing tow truck stuff. And no, I ended up, my first mission was like a week into Iraq, and that was the Striker. And I think there was maybe two missions I went on where I actually recovered vehicles that like were downed because they just broke down. Like one of them was a 5-ton with tires on the back, where the tires, it had broke down, and we were recovering it, and the tires had caught fire. And so went out there to put it out and recover it because the engine had just stopped working. I think that was maybe 2 or 3 missions that were like that. But every other mission that I did was recovery and mortuary affairs, and it just day in and day out for like 9 months straight. It takes a toll on you.
So, and I'm not going to ask questions about any details. I do want to ask a question about kind of, what your strategy was for dealing with it, even though you probably didn't consciously think about it. But one of the things you say in your memoir is that you're told that um, each body part goes into a separate bag because we'll do DNA testing to find out which arm goes with which foot and so
Mm-hmm.
so I think we'll just kind of make the point of the kind of stuff you saw that way, that different parts, each separate part goes into a separate bag, and then folks later on down the road will figure out what parts go with each other. Um, so you experienced this the first time,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I'm assuming is, for lack of a better word, sort of a shocking experience seeing this for the first time. But then you're gonna have to go back again and again and again and again. And maybe you sort of consciously think it through. What's my strategy going to be for doing this again? Um, Unlikely, though. I'm thinking it's probably not likely that you consciously thought it through. But as you look back, um, what was your, what did you do psychologically? Um, in your own mind, as you're pulling up to this vehicle, you've seen it before, you have a pretty good idea of what's coming.
Hmm.
Although I imagine even well into it, you'll see some things that are just, shocking. Um, what do you do psychologically in your own mind to kind of get ready for what you're going to be doing over the next few minutes?
Um, well, I can say for the first 2 weeks, I every single scene we came up on, I threw up because I just it was just the stench of fresh blood just saturated in things has a certain smell to it, and it's it's overpowering. It's almost like if someone puts on way too much perfume or too much cologne and just overpowers you. um, Something that's been saturated in blood has that distinct smell. And it's to the point where it's so overpowering, it almost makes that the saliva glands in your mouth start reacting to it. And so your eyes start watering, your mouth starts salivating, and then all of a sudden, like, and then you visually see what it is that's causing that stench, and it makes you sick to your stomach. And it's mostly because of, like, you're gonna throw up, your mouth starts salivating really bad. For some reason, uh, and I don't know the actual like medical reason why, but for some reason, those first 2 weeks, every single time, I threw up. And so I would mentally start preparing myself, like, all right, not eating, not drinking before this mission. Like, and there was one time when we were supposed to be off, and I like had a big ass salad, and I was eating like a boiled steak because that's how they did our steaks in Iraq. They boiled them. It's do not recommend. But I had finished eating, and all of a sudden, I got a call over the radio that we were leaving, and I'm like, "What? We're supposed to be off today?" And he's like, "They're already out on mission. They have another mission in the pipeline. We gotta go." So we got called up. I'm like, man. And so, like, I remember being on the side of the het trying to make myself throw up so that I didn't throw up on scene, because I knew that I couldn't do my job correctly if I was running out of the vehicle or running into live fire having to throw up, because you couldn't throw up in the vehicle, and you're not allowed to throw up on scene because it's technically a crime scene. So you had to literally like run behind your own vehicle and throw up as quickly as possible, and then run back, and all while there's live fire going on, there's people shooting, there's people returning fire, it's not a controlled scene, so there's chaos already. So I started mentally preparing myself for that, and I remember trying to force myself to throw up by sticking my finger down my throat because I didn't want to have to throw up while I was there. So I would start putting a cigarette in my mouth as we went on scene, because the smell of the tobacco in my nose would actually stifle the smell of the blood. And by the time we got, and it's not just like the blood, it was smoke, uh diesel fuel, JP8, like, and then the blood on top of that. And then if it had been sitting in the sun, if it was putrefied, or like the bodies had been in the sun too long or baked inside the vehicle too long because they no longer had AC going, like that smell. So like putting the cigarette in my mouth actually helped because it masked it all. I just made sure I didn't open my mouth at all because you could taste it in your mouth.
Sure. Let me, here's just a hypothesis I have, and let me just, pitch it to you and then hear your
Mhm.
response. So, I mean, ideally in this kind of situation, um, I think the ideal would be that you want to approach the body parts in kind of a spirit of respect, or, reverence or something like that. You've mentioned live fire, and I want to ask you about that. But My guess is, though, that that's not really possible to do in this context. That you get in this context, and my assumption is that the mindset is let's get this over with as quickly as we can. Um, is that right? I mean, I'm just assuming in this context, it's just not possible to approach this kind of situation in any kind of with any sense of reverence or honor or even dignity, if that's right.
So I will say, like, the first month that I was doing it, that's what I was doing. I was like, just bag it and tag it, let's go. And then after getting used to it, and I hate saying that word, getting used to it, because there's no way you can really get used to it, but you get accustomed to the bodies, the smell, being shot at, being blown up next to, like, like, so you get so used to it that you just don't even, for a lack of a better term, you just don't give a shit. So I started taking more time because I wanted to make sure, because after, I think, yeah, it was the A1 Abrams that we did. After that one, I started taking my time. And I will say a little bit about that recovery mission. We went out on in the het and the trailer to recover an A1 Abrams whose top had been tank. A1 Abrams is a tank that had been they'd rolled over a pressure plate IED and had gone up and into the vehicle or the tank and blown the top off. And so everyone inside was instantaneously killed. One guy was apparently alive for a little while, but died from bleeding out. And because a piece of shrapnel had gone straight into his neck and he bled out from that. And when I got to him, he was holding onto his neck, but he was already dead. Um, after that one, I think the reason why was because I think that was the first mission where I actually knew the people that were inside. And so I started taking my time. And I realized that, and I had, after that mission, I had a really bad breakdown when I got back. I started, like, we were turning in all of our, Sergeant Lippert was turning in all the paperwork with mortuary affairs. And I was standing outside and I was just chain smoking one after another after another. And then finally, one of my sergeants walked by, and I'm still friends with him. He was Staff Sergeant Crump. His name's Walter Crump. He's a really great guy. Um, he asked me, he's like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I said, "Honestly, no." And he was like, "What happened?" And I told him what happened. He was like, he goes, you need to go see and talk to someone. I was like, "No, I'm not going to do that." And he goes, "Why?" And I go, "Because I can close my eyes and still see everything." I said, "I'm not going to go talk to someone." And he's like, "Promise me you'll go talk to someone though." And I was like, "When I'm ready, I will." I never did. But I literally maybe slept 45 minutes that night because I could close my eyes and see everything all over again. And and so, like, I stayed up, just chain smoking and sitting outside and writing in my journal. And at one point I think I walked to the NWR tent and called my grandparents, and they were so great about it. I would call at like 3 in the morning San Diego time and they'd still pick up. Um, and I remember calling, and uh, my grandfather, hello, and hold on, let me go get Nana, and passes the phone over to my grandmother. And I said, no, 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 I want to talk to you. And he goes, why? And I go, I can't sleep, and I saw something horrible today that happened to one of the people I knew. And he's like, say no more, because he was a Vietnam vet. He knew. He's like, yep. He's like, he's like, what you got to do is this. He said, if you can, go over to the international side because they're allowed to drink in a time of war in a combat zone. Go over there. go make friends, go drink a beer, go smoke cigarettes, go smoke and joke, and then go to sleep. And I said, okay. So I went over to the international side, which is on the opposite side of Saddam Hussein's palace. So where we were at was called Camp Liberty, and where the international people were, the coalition forces, was called Camp Victory. So I went over to Camp Victory and made friends with some Australians in the DFAC, and just joking around. And they invited me back to go, drink Foster's with them. So I had, and these cans, like, I don't know if you've ever seen a Foster's can. They're massive. So I went from like, and I'm 19. Like, I've never drank really in my whole entire life. And so I drank this beer and smoked and joked with them. I think I stayed up till about 1 a.m. with them, and then went back to my hooch and passed out, and woke up the next day, and was like, okay, I can do this. I can do this. I just need to find a way. And so I started like watching stuff to fall asleep because I needed interaction, like physical interaction with people. So I'd sit out on my hooch every night after I would get back, or whenever I'd get back, and I'd sit out there and I'd smoke and hang out and talk to people as they walk by. And that's what got me to calm down enough for me to actually fall asleep. But I think after that, Abrams, that's when I started to just like, I just shut it off. I shut all my emotions off and just did my job as best as I could. And really at that point, I had been in Iraq, I want to say a month and a half. Um, and just violence every day, mortar round attacks every day, getting shot at almost every day. And to the point where I was numb to it. So it didn't matter. So I just shut off my emotions and did my job, like, I guess, like an automaton robot. But when it came to recovering the bodies, I took more time because I was able to just shut everything off, and separate myself from the situation. So like my emotions, my mentality, all of that, just separated it completely from, who I was and what I was doing. And I was able to just do my job that way. But I mean, it took a toll, because when you shut your humanity off and you shut that sense of self off, it's really hard to turn it back on and become a normal person again.
So you said that the night after this event, the recovery event with the tank, that you could close your eyes and see it all. I'm sure that's still true.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
I mean, right, you can do it right now. You can see it right
Mm-hmm.
now. So these years after, I mean, I can't think of a better way of formulating it. Those bodies that you recovered, what is your relationship with them now?
Um, During the daytime, it's in my thoughts, right? And like I know about it, and I can articulate it better than I could before. But at night, I have night terrors really bad. So much so that my husband like will wake me up. And I have a service dog that actually will is trained to climb onto me and climb up my side and lick my face and nuzzle my chin to wake me up. Because and there are times when I came back, I would wake up from a nightmare and I'd be standing in a place that I had no idea how I got there. Um, and now it's more so, um, when I have them, it's more so that I'm not scared of them anymore, like I used to be when I first came back. Like I'd have a nightmare and I'd wake up scared and didn't know where I was. And now I wake up and I feel sad and remorse and regret and this pain that somehow I didn't do my job well enough to bring all of them home. And it's a different feeling now than it was when I first got back. There was a sense of dread and terror of going to sleep when I first got back because I knew I was going to have a nightmare. And now it's more of a sense of like, I wake up and I feel pain in my heart. I feel this sense of like survivor's guilt that didn't used to be there before. So, in a sense, they have, interacting with the bodies and what I did has changed, but also, as a person, you evolve and change yourself. So of course, the type of trauma that you encounter never changes, but the way that you interact with that trauma does. And so I think as I mature and come to a more realization of everything, you tend to have a different perspective. And so my perspective has changed over the years to more of survivor's guilt.
So you start out saying, I want to be a mechanic, I want to serve,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be in combat. That's, part of the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sure, I'll be part of recovery, cars on the side of the road, we'll go pick that up. Turns out that's also going to be linked to recovery of bodies. So now, you're seeing close up the effects of war. A little bit ago, you referred to live fire, and you also do find yourself in actual combat situations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what was the first combat situation you found yourself in? How did that unfold?
Um, we were on a recovery mission, and we got ambushed while we were trying to recover the vehicle. The people inside were alive, so like it was just that they had rolled over. They had barely rolled over the pressure plate IED, and it was an they had like blown like the front of the Humvee up, but like everyone inside was fine. A couple of them had like concussions and stuff, and they were medevaced for their injuries. And but as we were recovering the Humvee, we got ambushed by live fire, and it was on the what we call Route Irish. It's one of the major highways in Baghdad. And it was right outside of Route Irish, past checkpoint one. And it was a small village, that they had turned off of past checkpoint one. You could go left or right, and they went right. And it was just past that there was a village, and there was, like houses on both sides. And I just thought, I was thinking to myself, I was like, man, we're gonna get shot at. Like I just had this sinking feeling that like if and we had a security team with us. We had two gun trucks in front of us, two gun trucks in the back of us pulling security. So it was 360 security, as we're working. But all of a sudden we got ambushed with live fire, and we were surrounded by like 15 dudes with AK-47s shooting at us. And at first you hear it, and then all of a sudden you start hearing the pinging coming off of the metal on the truck and the ricochets, and then you hear the return fire. And so you're sitting there trying to do your job while trying not to get shot, but also trying to assist because you're also being ambushed. So it's a very strange dichotomy of not of trying to survive, but also trying to do your job. That one time, I think that's the second time I was most scared in my whole entire life, because one ricocheted right off next to my head. And like had I been standing right where I was at, I would have gotten a bullet right. And so because I was trying to shackle one of the chains around the Humvee axle and bring it back around and hook it in. And as I was hooking it in, it wouldn't hook in properly. So I went back over to grab more slack. And as I did that, it ricocheted right past me. And I was like, oh man. And so like I instantly like ducked to the ground and was like sitting there like, I'm not getting back up there. Like we can wait until they're all dead. I'm not doing it. And then my sergeant came around the other side and he's like, what are you doing? Get up off the ground and do your job. And I was just like, okay. And like got up and started doing it again because, he's my sergeant. I have to do what he says. So like it wasn't a matter of like, well, screw that. I don't want to die. It was like, all right, cool, I'll go do my job. And so, but that I think that's like probably the second time I was most scared in my life. The first time was the striker. That's the first time I had ever dealt with death full fledged and like actual like bodies and stuff like that. And it hits you like a ton of bricks. Because if you've never seen bodies before, if you've never seen blood before, if you've never been in a situation where someone is bleeding and dying, it is extremely traumatic. And so that first time being in combat and being shot at, that was traumatizing a little bit. But again, just like being on recovery missions for a month and a half, you just get used to it to the point where you're just like, and duck my head. All right, there's a wave of silence. They must be reloading. Okay, quick, do your job. So like you wait until they stop shooting and they're reloading and you quickly do your job real quick and then you get back down and return fire. And then you wait for them to reload again and then you get back up and return fire. So it is a weird sense of like uh almost like a chaotic ballet of
Mm.
violence.
Yeah. Um, One of the stories that you come back to at least a few times in the memoir is of the boy, and if I'm making all the connections correctly, I think near the end of the memoir you give him a name, Jahir. Um,
Mm-hmm.
um, can you tell that story? What is the story of the boy that you return to a few times?
So we were doing I was on a convoy for a humanitarian mission. So we were supposed to be delivering medical supplies and water to an outskirts village as part of like a humanitarian aid thing. And we were escorting some of the medics out there so they could, render aid to people and help those who were sick or injured and stuff like that were Iraqi local nationals. And so I was doing security, so as a 50 cal gunner, because I was certified. One of my many skill identifiers that they forced me to do. Um, and like I said, I never did my job. Um, so we were coming through a village. It was almost like right on the outskirts of the city in Baghdad, um, just past what we call the Great Wall of Baghdad. Um, and on top of and we're there about some of them were 2 stories high and some of them were 3 stories high of these tall buildings. And if you've ever seen Middle Eastern countries, they're in the cities, they have wide streets, but on the outskirts of the city, they're very, very narrow. About enough for maybe a car to get through, maybe 2 cars, but for the most part, it's about maybe a full car length wide. And it was just enough for our Humvees to get through. And I remember going through and sort of they call it name tape deflate. So if your name tape is here on your uniform, right? So you get your uniform like right here, you're supposed to go down below so your eyes are right here, so that if anything happens, your whole body isn't showing, and so you don't get shot in your center mass. So going through, I was security right. So my 50 cal gun was pointing to the right side, and I'm sitting there pulling security and watching the rooftops. And all of a sudden, I see someone duck up and then duck back down. And I was like, oh no, there's people on the roofs. And so I relayed it over the comms, like, hey, we've got contact on rooftops. And I said, no known amount. And so like, so that means that like, we don't know how many are up there. We just know that there's people on the roofs. And then all of a sudden that popped back up again and he started shooting. And at that point, I had popped up just enough so I could start shooting back, and one of the bullets from his AK ricocheted and pinged off of the shield behind me and went into the wall of the building behind me. And I kind of did a quick one of these and looked, and I was like, crap, that was close. So he had a malfunction with his gun, is what I think it was. I'm not sure if he was reloading or had a malfunction, but he dropped back down, and I said, good, that's my opportunity. So when I reload, I loaded up and I waited for him to pop back up. When he popped back up, I hit him with a 50 cal, and I said contact right, and I hit contact right. And so when I saw that happen, he popped back up. I put 3 or 4 rounds into his chest, and just as that happened, I just saw him topple over and damn near almost hit our Humvee as he toppled over, because again, the streets are really narrow, and fell right outside the truck on the passenger side, TC side of the truck. And I just sat there and stared at him, and that's when I realized it wasn't a man, it was a boy. And like they quickly like that happened, I quickly swiveled back around to look and see at the rest of the right side, because that was my sector, to see if there was any more contact to the right. And so I did cover fire as they were dismounted and started clearing those 2 buildings that the contact was coming from. And once it was all clear and we were sitting there waiting, we were able to get out and pull security on the outside. So I was like, I told my TC at the time, I was like, I gotta get out of this Humvee. I gotta get out. I said, I need some fresh air. He's like, all right, we'll have Bravo 6 come behind you and pull security. So Bravo 6 came in and pulled security on the 50 cal behind me so that I could get out and step out. And when I stepped out in a pool of that kid's blood. And that's when I realized like the gravity of what I had done. And it really sunk in that I had just killed a boy. Like I didn't kill an adult. I didn't kill an enemy. I killed a kid. And it hit me like he's almost as old as I am. Like he could be, my brother. He was almost my brother's age. And it I think that's one of the things that broke my spirit the most, is realizing that they're recruiting kids to shoot at us, and we're having no choice but to shoot kids. And it's just this horrible feeling of like, how do we stop this? Like, what has happened so badly? Is it because we're here that this is happening, or is it because they're that evil? And so I couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that, not only had this kid not even lived his life yet, but that I hadn't lived my life either. I was like, I was 19 at the time. And I realized that like, I can't die here. If I die here, I've got so much more to do with my life. And it became at that point a realization of like, I need to survive. I need to get out of here. And so at that point, you do exactly what you can in order to survive. And one of those things was just, pushing all of that behind the back of your head so that you can do your job. And it wasn't until, I had my own kids that I kept going back to this reoccurring nightmare of shooting this kid. And I realized that it was complete unresolved trauma of that I killed a kid that, had this been in the United States, I'd be in jail right now. It doesn't matter if he shot me, I murdered him. And so that was that all unresolved sort of part of my own moral character, that like I'm a murderer. Like I killed someone, and I couldn't forgive myself for the fact that it was a time of war, and that what I had done had taken someone else's child away from them. And it made me think about like, what would he have done with his life? Had he not been there, had he not shot at me, had he been at school that day, had he not been recruited, a terrorist cell. And then I started thinking about my life, like, what if I had that bullet didn't ricochet off of my shield and hit the building behind me? What if it had hit me in the throat? Like, where would he have cared about me? as much as I care about him now, years later. And it really, it messed me up for a little while because I realized that maybe him killing me wouldn't have meant enough to him for him to remember, or maybe it would have. Maybe he was just like me and would have struggled with the same sort of moral self about having to shoot at someone and kill someone when you're not a trained killer. You're not even close to it. You're not SEAL Team 6. You're not a Green Beret. You're not, an infantryman kicking in front doors. You should be at school or you should be at college. You should be living your life. You should be going, to the south of France with all your other friends and getting drunk on wine at 19. And then yet you're stuck in a war zone trying to just survive every day. And it's one of those things where you struggle with what do you have to do today to survive? And not knowing the answer to that question until you're presented with that situation was hard for me to wrap my brain around at first. And then I remember having a conversation with my sergeant and him telling me, he's like, you just got to shut it off. Just shut it off and realize that you're doing your job. Your government has put you here. Military has put you here, and that they've put you in an impossible situation, and all you're doing is trying to survive an impossible situation.
So your sergeant says to you, you're in an impossible situation and all you need to do is try to survive. And I want to link that to something you said a little while ago that 9/11, had a great impact on you when you enlisted in the Army. You very much had the war against terrorism in your mind and you wanted to play a part. But what
Mm-hmm.
becomes clear in your memoir is that, and this is very common among combat vets, whatever they were thinking before they get in the world of combat, once you get into the world of combat, all the world of combat is you and the soldier next to you and surviving,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what it's about. But do you remember, I mean, at what point um, the war on terrorism and all that stuff, I mean, let me put it this way. I mean, at least three times in your memoir, you said that I didn't even know why I was in Iraq. Like, why are we even here?
Mm-hmm.
And yet you're experiencing all of this in service to something, and you can't even answer the question, why are we here, right? So do you remember, I mean, was there a moment or a time when, what you thought this war was about just kind of vanished, and now I don't even know why I'm here, but I know that I'm in this catastrophic dead zone, for months. Do you have a recollection of when that happened, when you're thinking about the meaning of the war changed?
Yeah. There was two missions where I started to sort of question why we were there. One was when we were in Sadr City, and I was part of the personal security detachment team, and they were going in to try and extract a male that they wanted to question. And when we went in, they needed a female because they weren't allowed to interact with the female or the children. So naturally, I was a 50 cal gunner. I had combat experience already, so they picked me. So when we went in, I'm sitting there and they went in and they put the women and children. It was a wife, a mother, and two children, two small children. It was a little boy, maybe three, and a girl who looked like maybe she was 7 or 8. And they put them on this mattress in the living room. And I was sitting there and I'm watching them. And as I'm watching them, I can hear in the other room that they're just beating the ever living God out of the father. And the kids are screaming and scared, and the wife is crying. And I'm sitting here like, what in the hell is that? Like, what are we doing here? Like, it's one thing to question him, but it's another thing to beat him to a pulp in his own master bedroom. Why his women and children, why his wife and his children are sitting in the living room crying. and we've invaded their home. It's I just sat there and I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, I'm like, are you going to take him back and interrogate him, or no, you're just going to beat him to a pulp in his own bedroom, and then leave him there to bleed? And it made me so angry. And I just remember, like, I remember gripping my M4 really tight and my posture just getting really rigid. And the wife looked at me and started getting kind of scared. Like she thought I was going to do something to her. And I was like, no, 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 no. And I actually, I carried like these little suckers that my grandmother gave me. They're like the strawberry ones with like the filling on the inside. So I took a couple of them out of one of my pouches and I handed them to the kids. And I handed, well, I tried to hand it to the kids. They wouldn't take it. So I gave it to the mom. The mom, and I said, here. And so I took one and put one in my mouth so she knew it wasn't poison. And so she handed them both to the kids. And I said, you're gonna be okay. They're not gonna do anything to you. They just want him. And she was just trying to calm the kids down. So she gave them the candy. And we sat there and there's this weird realization that this was their normal. And how scared and how bad it would be if something like that happened in the US.
Mm.
And it just boggled my mind that, like this would never happen in our country. But why are we allowing it to happen in theirs? I started to get super resentful and really discontent with my association with the violence. And I think my breaking point was the orphanage. Um, watching, seeing those children, like how you see those those commercials for like humanitarian aid, the African children dying and starving and stuff like that. You see that, and you see it firsthand. You see it in a country that you've invaded and that you're supposedly trying to help. Um, but all those kids are there at that orphanage because either one or both of their parents are shot and killed. And it's because of the war. And that now they're being abused, neglected, beaten, and starved in this orphanage that's supposedly supposed to be ran by people who care about them in the country, but they're profiting off of the spoils of war and pocketing all the money and all the supplies that we're giving them to take care of these kids. And at that point I was like, well, humanitarianism isn't working either, but neither is the violence. And I'm like, and I just sat there just more and more resentful that we were there and more discontent to the point where like I didn't even want to be there because I the humanitarian side of the aspect while we were there was not working. I had seen the dark side of what our humanitarian aid had done. Um, and I had also witnessed it firsthand. Um, and so seeing that and then seeing the violence of what we were doing too, just to get information on something that may or may not be true, on suspected known terrorist cells in the area. It made me so discontent and I felt like I needed to disassociate myself with what was going on. So I have these cards. They're called Iraqi Most Wanted playing cards. And they gave it to us when we got off the plane. And on every plane, every deck of on the card is a known terrorist.
Right.
And so like, they have some that don't have, and that's how we would track these people down in the streets of Baghdad or in Ramadi or stuff like that. We would look at our playing cards and be like, oh, and some of the guys would put X's on those that we had killed. And I'm just like sitting there going like, man, are you kidding me? Like, this is what we've come down to? Like, yeah, we're playing cards, but on of them we're taking out these bad guys and we're murdering them. And it's supposed to be fun. They've made it into a fun game. And I'm like, this, yeah, murdering people is fun. That's real smart.
Because as I look behind you, I see a rug from Iraq. I see challenge coins. I see medals. I see a book about the United States Army. I see other things back there. I see behind your shoulder there. I see the pack of wanted cards there.
Hmm.
You get from Iraq. I see a helmet back there.
Hmm.
So what does all of that stuff mean to you? Why did you put time and energy into putting those things up?
I think because all of them hold different memories, some good, some bad. But if you only hold on to the good memories, then you lose that sense of reality with what you've done and where you've been and who you no longer ever want to be again. And so I learned that sometimes you have to take the good. They all have some sort of significance in terms of my life. And so it's sort of a memory wall, basically, uh, for me not to forget. Because a lot of the problem with having a TBI is I forget things. And I don't want to forget things that impacted my life so much that it changed who I was.
You mentioned TBI, traumatic brain injury.
Mhm.
Where did that come from?
I got blown up in the motor pool from a mortar round that came in into the motor pool. Surprisingly, the one day I was doing my job as a mechanic, I got blown up.
Wow.
So so I have a traumatic brain injury from that.
Wow. One of the questions you pose, and then I think you spend a lot of time addressing it in your memoir, the question you write, what happens when war follows you home? I think in a way, this whole discussion has been an answer to that question. Your memoir certainly is an answer to that question. Um, but what is as the question, as your question is read back to you specifically, um, what is your response? What happens when the war follows you home?
I think oh, at some point you have to redefine what home is. And for me, I struggled to find home. Um, and and deal with the war as a progression of that. Um, and then I slowly started to realize as I got older that it's okay that the war followed you home as long as home is a place of security for you. So I realized that, home wasn't a place, it was the people. And so as long as I had the people that made a place feel like home, that it didn't matter that the war had followed me